Is a civil war approaching in the United States? This week, the tension and standoff between the state government of Texas and the federal government in Washington, D.C. has reached very high and dangerous levels.
Since the arrival of President Joe Biden to power in 2021, the southern border of the United States, with Texas at its epicenter, has witnessed a record number of migrants crossing illegally, causing an unprecedented conflict between the state government of Texas and the federal administration over the different ways of addressing the crisis. The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, a Republican, has openly challenged the Biden administration's immigration policies, arguing that the federal government has failed in its duty to protect the border and therefore has failed in its constitutional obligation to the state of Texas. The matter is serious, since on one hand, there are federal forces that respond to the orders of the President of the U.S., and on the other, state forces commanded by the governor which have clashed with the Border Patrol. The standoff between Texas and the federal government even reached the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest judicial authority in the country, which ordered Texas to comply with the orders from Washington, D.C., to which Texas simply and flatly refused. All of this has occurred at a time of extreme polarization in the country between Republican and Democratic states. So much so that the possibility of Texas leaving the Union and becoming a new independent nation has been raised. Could this be possible? What is the legal mechanism anticipated for a state to leave the Union? Why could the migration crisis be the last straw that breaks the camel's back of the American Union? That is what we are going to see today. Texas, known as the Lone Star State, has a unique history that reflects its current identity as an important player on the American stage. Originally, this vast region was part of Mexico until 1836, when, after a series of conflicts and the famous Battle of the Alamo, Texas declared itself an independent republic. For nearly a decade, the Republic of Texas existed as a sovereign nation, proudly displaying its single-star flag, a symbol of its independence and uniqueness. The annexation of Texas to the United States in 1845 marked a turning point in the history of both the state and the nation. The incorporation of Texas, a vast territory with abundant resources, strengthened the economy and military power of the United States, a power that is still evident today. The Mexican heritage, along with the American influence, has created a unique blend that is reflected in its culture. What makes Texas special and different from the other 49 states of the U.S.? Let's take a look. Texas is not only a giant in terms of size, but also in its economic and strategic impact on the United States. With an economy so large that, if it were an independent country, it would rank among the top 10 largest in the world. Texas is a fundamental pillar in various key sectors, notably the oil and energy industry. Nearly half of the oil produced by the U.S. comes precisely from Texas. Sharing a long border with Mexico, Texas is a key gateway for commerce and people between the two countries. This border position also places it at the epicenter of the current immigration crisis, where decisions made in Texas have profound implications for the rest of the country's national security. Such a critical issue that it really is an element capable of shaking the very foundations of the American Union and could lead to a permanent fracture in the country. But how serious is the crisis? What has the Biden-led federal government done to mitigate this situation? What has been Texas's stance on illegal immigration? We're about to find out right now. The migration crisis at the southern border of the United States, with Texas as one of its most critical points, is a frightening situation. The figures speak for themselves. In the Del Rio sector, which includes Eagle Pass, there were more than 393,000 migrant encounters in the year 2023. And remember, that's just in that sector. The number of migrants entering the US illegally has never been so high. Last year, there were more than 2.5 million people who crossed the border. Abbott has ordered the construction of physical barriers and the implementation of stricter security policies in an effort to control and reduce the number of illegal crossings. One of these measures was the installation of barbed wire on the other side of the river, precisely to prevent migrants from crossing, and the deployment of military personnel from the National Guard, under the direct orders of the governor, to prevent the crossing of migrants. Governor Greg Abbott has been a vocal critic of the Biden administration, accusing it of failing to fulfill its federal obligations to secure the border and protect the state of Texas. In short, the governor of Texas has said that Biden has violated his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the immigration laws enacted by Congress, and as such, as President Biden has betrayed the Constitution, he has ordered state forces to take their own measures which are beyond their state powers to secure their border. The federal government is not pleased with this at all. According to Washington, D.C., Texas's stance is unconstitutional as it usurps federal authority on immigration matters. But this legal challenge has not dissuaded Texas, which has continued with its border security strategy. Furthermore, Texas has sought to expand its role in the enforcement of state immigration laws. This has included policies that allow state authorities to detain and return migrants back to Mexico, a function that was traditionally reserved solely for the federal government. These actions have led to open legal confrontations with the U.S. Department of Justice, which says that immigration policy is a matter solely of federal competence. But is Texas's position unique in the United States? The truth is no. Precisely where state authorities have sent buses and transportation for migrants arriving in Texas to go to Democratic states, generally more open to immigration, but even so, these generous Democratic states and sanctuary cities are reaching a limit. Indeed, the mayor of New York City has said that mass migration is one of the biggest threats the city has faced. In 2023, the city of New York spent $1.5 billion to provide shelter, food, and services to asylum seekers. One of the most critical points of this conflict was Governor Greg Abbott's authorization for the Texas National Guard to install barbed wire and other obstacles at the border, a measure that was appealed by the federal government before the United States Supreme Court. The court ordered that Texas cannot block federal agents' access to the border with Mexico. At first glance, this decision is not a surprise because it upholds the long-standing precedent that the federal government has exclusive authority to enforce border security. The governor of Texas ordered an even greater militarization of the border with more National Guard elements. So here we ask the million-dollar question. Could a possible confrontation between American troops themselves occur? Federal on one side and state on the other? That's what we're going to see. The escalation of conflict at the Texas border raises the alarming possibility of a clash between different U.S. security forces. With the Texas National Guard deployed at the border by Governor Abbott's order and the Border Patrol operating under Biden's directive, the situation at the border becomes complex and potentially hostile. The presence of multiple security forces in the same space, each with different orders and loyalties, could lead to confusion and operational conflicts. The main concern is how these forces will interact with each other, especially if contradictory orders are given or if their objectives are in direct conflict. The possibility of a clash or conflict between U.S. troops, federal on one side and state on the other, while very, very small, is not zero, especially considering that Texas has ignored a Supreme Court order, therefore already in part disobeying the Constitution, which mandates that Supreme Court rulings must be followed. Now moving further into hypothetical territory. In the worst-case scenario, could Texas really secede from the American Union? What would be the constitutional procedure for such a case? Let's see what the Constitution says. The tension between Texas and the federal government has led some to speculate about the possibility, albeit minimal, of a separation or even independence of Texas. However, from a legal and constitutional point of view, the possibility of Texas, or any other state, separating from the Union is extremely complicated and, in practice, impossible. The Constitution of the United States does not provide a mechanism for the secession of states, and the Supreme Court has reinforced the idea of a perpetual and indissoluble union in historical decisions such as Texas versus White in 1869. So the Constitution is clear: separation is impossible, at least legally. Beyond legal barriers, the idea of Texas's independence is economically suicidal. Texas's economy and infrastructure are deeply intertwined with the rest of the United States, making separation not just self-sabotage, but also potentially damaging to both the state and the country. Possibility of balkanization or a civil war in the United States is highly improbable. We cannot say it is zero, but the Constitution and the country's federal system are designed to maintain the Union and resolve conflicts through legal and political channels. But it's true that the Texas crisis is precisely a situation that is putting to the test that indissoluble union that is the United States. Only time will tell who will win the pressure, whether it will ultimately be Texas, the federal government, or if Congress will finally pass a bipartisan law allowing Biden to take more actions like closing the border, as he has promised he will do. But now the question goes to you: who do you support, Texas or the federal government?